Oh, good God. All right. Let's get into this thing. So, Hostel 1, Hostel 2. Basically, when these came out, I remember that obviously they were a huge fucking deal. And like I feel like I have a harder time than most people like remembering how I felt about a movie, but I do remember like being into these movies when they came out. And the name Quentin Tarantino was probably the thing that drew me and a lot of people to the theater in the first place to see it. But this is 3 years after Eli Roth came out with Cabin Fever, and evidently Quentin Tarantino saw that and he loved it. And he reached out to Eli Roth. He befriended him and they just became friends. And at the time, Eli Roth is just getting offer after offer for horror remakes. They want him to do The Fog. They want him to do a Texas Chainsaw Massacre movie, Last House on the Left. And Quentin Tarantino, luckily, is saying no, 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 and kept on getting him to just come up with an original idea. And he kind of pulled this out like, I've had this idea for a while about this thing in Europe with people traveling. He didn't really like love it. And he told it to Quentin Tarantino. And he's like, dude, that's your movie. He's like, this is fucking brilliant. And in my opinion, like these movies they get a bad rap, both of them. But just from talking to you three this week, none of you guys are giving this movie a bad rap. I can tell we all really, really enjoy these flicks, but a lot of people don't. They both are hovering around like 50-60% on Rotten Tomatoes. And I really feel like they don't get the respect that they deserve, and that people just kind of lump them in with the torture porn and they remember them differently. This is like the Texas Chainsaw Massacre, where people think it's super bloody and super gory. And don't get me wrong, Hostel 1 and 2, they have plenty of that, but it's way more restrained than what I remembered. And it's done more sophisticatedly, or whatever, however you say that word, than I remembered as well. But the dude that I know is a big fucking apologist for Eli Roth in every way, shape, or form. And I know a lover of these movies, Mr. Rockin Robbie. What's just your thoughts on the man himself, Eli Roth, and then Hostel 1. We're gonna start with that one, obviously. Hostel 1, your history with it, and how was it for you on the rewatch, brother?
Well, I love Eli Roth. Like I love his films. Cabin Fever, I remember when that came out. I saw it in the theater. I really enjoyed it. I remember the movie theater. I remember the poster for Hostel, and it said Quentin Tarantino presents, and everybody was like, "Oh, this is going to be like the next Saw. It's going to be super gnarly. It's going to be all this kind of stuff, right?" And I remember watching it and loving it, absolutely loving it. And every time I've watched it since, I just love it more and more and more. What I love about the first one is that, and first of all, I'm probably the biggest Eli Roth fan that most of y'all know. Like, I love pretty much all of his movies. I think the dude is super fucking hot. I've met him. It was a highlight of my life was meeting Eli Roth and having a very brief chat with him about The Prowler and Thanksgiving and its influence. But the first Hostel movie, what I love about it is my first impressions of it were, this is like a sex comedy for like the first act. And then it starts getting very gnarly, right? And it's playing with certain fears that Americans in particular have about like going overseas, right? But it's also playing with this like idea that Americans have apparently when they go overseas, where they're like, I'm a fucking American. The rest of the world don't give a shit, man. Like, that's not a bonus. You're not going to get a gold star for that, right? I love how bold the film is. And it is bold. It's not as gory as one might think. And I do hate Hostel. There's my copy of number 1 right there. Hostel is torture porn by what that term means, right? I think the term, though, is dismissive, right? And I think that it's a generalization that doesn't necessarily work. Saw and Hostel were 2 movies that we look at the history of horror, right? American horror cinema, right? And then that's what we're talking about tonight, because you're about to get into the other countries in the coming weeks, right? But one of the things about American horror is that the biggest waves of it that work come after big societal upheavals or changes, right? Like the Great Depression led to like the launch of the Universal monster movies, right? There's elements of that in those movies, right? The atomic scare led to things like Them, and, you know, those giant like ant movies and Creature from the Black Lagoon and, you know, stuff like that, right? Then you have the post-Vietnam era where you're getting Last House on the Left, where you're getting Texas Chainsaw Massacre and Halloween, right? Phantasm. These are movies that are picking up on that zeitgeist, right? The distrust of the excessive Wall Street and government of the 80s, right, led to like a very colorful, kind of flamboyant horror, right? In the 90s, in American culture, if you remember, the 90s seemed pretty fucking easy for
Pretty
most
chill.
of us, right? And there
Pretty chill.
weren't too many great horror movies in the 90s, right? But then 9/11 happened and it changed things again. And the response post 9/11 to horror is torture porn.
Right.
That's what it is, right? And I think that term is dismissive, and I don't like that term, but I will concede that that's what this is. It's Saw, Hostel. They changed horror. These are at the front. Not only is Eli Roth such a horror fan, dude, I could listen to that dude talk about horror movies for hours. I have. Literally,
Yeah,
right?
Yeah, me too. Yeah.
Yeah. And he just loves doing it. He does like 4 fucking commentaries on each of these movies. He just loves even talking about his own movies.
Which is why I'm so annoyed. Just to anyone out there that is interested in getting these, don't buy the double feature like 1-pack, because you don't get anything. You don't get, it's like $4 that I paid for it on eBay, but you don't get any commentaries, any special features whatsoever.
Dude, these are so old school. You can see because it says like experience high definition on both of them. Like that means that's like first wave Blu-ray right there, buddy.
Right.
But like I love Eli Roth's take on horror as a whole, and I think it's so amazing and appropriate that he's one of the forefronts of that wave of horror that happened, like post 2001, post 9/11. I love the movie. I love how it plays with your expectations. It starts off and it's bold because it's not just the violence, it's the nudity, it's the sexual nature of this film, right? It's exploitative, but it's actually making a point about exploitation, because what the dudes are doing to the women in the first act is what happens to them in the second and third act, right? It's a perfect mirroring of it. I think this movie is smarter than the general audience thinks it is. I think, the first one is heavily influenced by Japanese horror, in particular Takashi Miike, right? I love him. He's great. Hostel is amazing. I love the bold nature of it. I love the thematics of it, the music, the way it vibes with like old school horror, but it was something new. It's groundbreaking, and it's I'm very proud of my boy Eli for being at the tip front of not just a Dick Foreskin, but of an American horror revival in a way, right?
Definitely. I heard the argument. I thought at first I was like, "Oh, that's crazy." That I had seen this on a series where they were covering the evolution of the slasher subgenre, and it does kind of make sense. What they were arguing was, pretty much after Scream had run its course and then Scary Movie came along, you couldn't make a serious slasher for a bit, and that's when you got Saw and you got Hostel, and there are these two franchises that, if you look at it, this is structured a lot like a slasher, where you've got these teens being picked off one by one, but it's such a different vehicle to get to it, and just a different way to generate scares. But hell yeah, man. Missing Link, my brother, I know that this is pretty much your era. This is right in your wheelhouse. So 2005 Hostel. What's your history with it, and how was the rewatch?
I remember loving this movie, man. I was just turning 17. I just remember this being a big deal. Like I thought like this was like, a horror movie for our generation,
Right.
I was never too keen on horror movies up until around, it was like 28 Days Later, and then like 2 years later was this and like Saw, So that kind of like kickstarted my semi interest in horror. I mean, I loved this as a teenager, it made me want to go to Amsterdam and hopefully shit like that might happen to me. My story played out a little bit differently, but no, I thought it was a brilliant movie. It was different. I like that comparison you said about it being a slasher. They just go about it in a different way, but like the teenagers still get picked off. There's a lot of sex in there.
Weed.
There's a few lines. Yeah, drinking, partying. That's like what the whole they go out there for that those core partying essentials. There was like 2 lines that I was like, maybe it's just because times have changed, but I was like, oh, you couldn't do that today. It was mostly when they're friends at the bar with the dude and like, you know, and
he calls him
it was just that was
word ass elf. Like, yeah, you know what?
Yes.
I'm glad you brought that up. This is actually one of the things I wanted to get into. That let's like, what did you guys think? Or, as far as what did we just talk about on your channel? Oh, Tropic Thunder. Tropic Thunder, all of the inappropriateness going on in that movie, all of the slurs that were being used are used for a reason and they're intentional. And there's a lot of the stuff in here, like the homophobia and like the over broiness, and like, oh, some of that I think is intentional. But the use of the homophobic slur, I don't know if that's just a sign of the times. That's like when an era where we were just kind of growing out of the use of that word as a culture. But I don't know if there is a point to it. You know what I mean? Are they making a comment on that, or is that done just because that's
no? I think it's just a sign of the times type of deal, in my personal opinion.
I think it's a sign of the times, but it works with it too, because what they're doing is he's luring you in to the beginning of this film where you're like, oh, it's me and my bros. How cool would that be to go to Amsterdam and smoke a lot of weed and fuck prostitutes, sex workers, and all this kind of, how fun is it? Oh, no, that's not fun. I wouldn't like it if it was done to me. Not at all, right? And so I do think that the use of the F word, what you're talking about, right?
Right.
I do think that is definitely a sign of the times. Same thing with Tropic Thunder. Like if Ben Stiller and Justin Theroux wrote that movie today, they wouldn't do that bit.
No,
you know what I'm saying? But it is intentional to like, it's broy as fuck. And this is I fucking hate this. Everybody says it's Eli Roth. Oh, that fucking bro dude who does those fucking horror movies with the titties and the fucking, the slurs and all that kind of stuff. I'm like, yeah, that dude who's like so fucking clever that he lured you into a fucking movie that you thought you were down for and then made you feel the exact same way that those women would have been felt. Well, you know what I'm saying?
Right.
Like I think it's that particular usage is of the time, but as a whole, the way that first act lures you in, reels you in is a very intentional.
I think I agree, because I was on the fence, bro. I wasn't gonna defend it. It's like, oh no, he's doing it on purpose, especially because the way the one killer puts his hand on his leg and his really like violent reaction to it. No touching, don't touch. Which I worked at a strip club for years, and I heard that over and over. No touching. I'm like, oh god, I got it. But that made me think that maybe he is being a little bit more clever with it than I had given him credit for. But yeah, I don't know about that part. But Steph, did you have more on your overall thoughts, or just on what we're talking about, brother?
I did think there's a little subtext there because remember they're at the bar and he like, I just wanted to apologize and puts his hand on his leg.
Yeah.
And he did have it. He was like, whoa, bro, you just touched your leg. It wasn't even a sexual advance. Like, calm down. Like,
well, he was. So
I think there was some subtext there. That is true. That is true. That is true.
Like that.
Trying to be closer to the salad.
But no, I think it's a great movie. Game changer, up there with the influential horror movies in the last 20 years. Modern horror movies. It's definitely up there, top 10, if not top 5 for me.
Hell yeah, man! I think it's one of those things. You can't. There's going to be a lot of people that criticize Eli Roth. No matter what you think of Eli Roth, you will never talk about Harry. Well, you'll never talk about horror.
Yeah, look at Robbie's icon. Look at Robbie's icon, though.
You'll never talk about horror from that era without mentioning Eli Roth and his impact. You have to. He was such a key figure of the time. And I said before, like, just because those movies and how brutal and how bro-y they were, that was the horror that we needed at that time. Like Robbie was saying, for whatever reason, coming out of 9/11 after that, we wanted to see this, and we wanted to see Kiefer Sutherland fucking torturing motherfuckers on Fox, like all day and all night. Like there was like a violence in the air at that time.
I was gonna say, you reminded me of the 9/11 thing. This was that paranoia, the fear was still rampant at the time in American culture. So it's like, Americans weren't really going anywhere for like the first 5 years after 9/11. So it was like it played on that paranoia of like everyone's out to get in, Americans when they step outside of the zone.
And it's afraid of the
yeah.
world, afraid to travel, and afraid of the world and the rest of the planet. There was a very like isolated, not like in a negative way, and like a comfy, cozy feeling before 9/11, where it's like we're secure here and they don't fuck with us. We fuck with them, but they don't fuck with us. And it really did change the way, like we all felt a little less safe, obviously, after that. But Stu, my brother, from another, what's your thoughts on the rewatch and your history with Hostel 1?
So I did see this one in theaters, and I echo what everybody said about it being a moment in horror, because I wasn't seeing like every horror movie in theaters at that time, only those big events. And I remember this one being a big event. I remember, when you pitched it in the back chat or whatever, dude, my first thought was that scene with the Achilles tendons, man. That was so visceral to me. I never forgot that. Like, that was such a great visual. And I agree with what Robbie said. I do think, despite like the surface level broism, I think it is a smarter movie than people give it credit for. And I love like how Inja said her favorite quote was, I get a lot of money for you. That makes you my bitch. When she literally walks Paxton into the spot at the end. I love how it empowered the women in this movie. And like, yeah, like the gore was there, but it was also like at times, it was so many different types of movie. Like there was suspense and thriller mode, and like I just love the way it built, to the climax, and I love the way it. I know we're going to get into it, but I love the way it carried over. I really enjoyed watching these back to back, and seeing like how they kind of pulled back on that universe and took a look at the bigger picture. But yeah, just excellent, man. It was so. It was like I said, that there's some like slightly cringy moments with some of the dialogue, but regardless, like I loved it. I really enjoyed the rewatch, and going back over it just reminded me why it was so visceral and moving in the first place. So yeah, I loved it.
Hell yeah, brother, dude. I think what am I trying to say? The subtleness of it. That's the biggest thing that really caught me off guard that I wasn't expecting. I expected, first of all, for there to be a lot more gore, a lot quicker in both of these movies.
Yes,
they're
agreed,
really restrained on it. You get to a half hour deep in Hostel 1 before all you see is dude's head.
And I remember thinking that at one point, I was like, man, like he's taking a minute to get there.
Yeah. Here's one thing I want to ask you guys. If you take yourself out of like knowing what you saw in the previews going up to this or what you had heard about this movie, like if you had never seen this movie or heard anything about it and you watch it, at what point, because that's one thing that really impresses me is the way he really builds out the mystery and like the tension behind that mystery of what the fuck is going on. It builds up like really, really well. But like at what point in the movie do you think you would fully know everything that's going on? You know what I mean? Because they reveal things very slowly until maybe you get to where you meet the American guy and he really lays it out. Like you'll know everything at that point, but you could have pieced it all together before that. But it's a slow process is what's interesting to me.
It's when Jay Hernandez's character Paxton goes back to the hostel the next day after his friends have checked out, and he goes into the room, his new room, and it's the same.
Yeah, I love that. I love that scene.
The girls walk by him. Oh, we're going to the spa, and you're like, wait a minute. That's exactly
that eliminates all doubt right there. That's very true.
It's cool though, right? Just the way that they kind of slowly string things out. And I remember specifically, like I remember the first time I saw it, or maybe it was from the previews, but thinking there was one killer. You're so trained at that point in 2005 to think there's one person behind this. So like when they show the first guy you see and they're cutting someone up, that's this guy and he's got all these people working for him. Yeah. So that is a really original idea that we kind of take for granted at this point, but it was so fucking original at the time.
Well, the genesis of this movie is that Eli Roth wanted to make a movie about the backpacking culture in Europe, right? Like people that like young, privileged fucking American kids that go to Europe or whatever, and they backpack across the country for a summer or for a year because they got a trust fund, or obviously these dudes got money.
Yeah, they don't ever once complain about it. Like, that's one thing I noticed. These guys never once were like, "Hey, man, we got to
redirect our whole goddamn summer vacation and go to Slovakia instead of Barcelona." And they're like, "Let's do it." Me, I would be like, "I ain't got the money for that,
man.
Dude. I planned this to the teeth, right?"
Exactly.
But so he wanted to make a movie about that and the creepy nature of a hostel. He didn't know what he wanted to do. Maybe at one point the hostel was going to be like a vampire like house, right? Like a like a nest of vampires.
Oh,
was like,
really?
is there a killer loose in the hostel? Something like that. He knew that Hostel was the name. That was the approach. But then Harry Knowles, who was the dude who ran Ain't It Cool News, if y'all remember that website, that ancient website from back in the day, he showed Eli Roth. They became friends. And that's a cool thing. Eli Roth will become friends with critics and become friends with fans and shit like that, right? And I'm just got my fingers crossed, brother. So I really do. Eli, if you're watching, come on, man. We met in Orlando. I was wearing the Prowler shirt. Let's hang out. Let's do some shows together. But Harry Knowles took him on this website where it was this place in Eastern Europe where you could pay $10,000 to go into a room and shoot somebody in the head.
Right.
And it was like somebody who maybe had a terminal disease or somebody whose life wasn't going well. And
they signed up for it.
They would sign up for it. They would, but they were like, this seems very real. And that's what took the direction into this. And also I want to point out, I love Inge's idea that the first main character, and I love so many people try to do the Alfred Hitchcock Psycho thing where you introduce a main character and then kill them. I don't know of anybody else who did it better or as good or almost as good as Alfred Hitchcock did than Eli Roth here in this movie. Because when that dude died, I was not ready for that. Everything led us to believe this is the main character. This is the story we're following. Even so much to the point that Jay Hernandez is a background character until he takes over. Right. So I really like that aspect, but I love her idea that dude, was it Josh? I can't remember the main character's name. But that maybe he is kind of a closet case, right? The way, if you really kind of look at it, that's an interesting reading. Like if it's queer coded or something, because
that's kind of how I read it. The way when he reaches out and touches his leg the second time,
and the fact that he doesn't want to
he's real shy about
a lot of the stuff. And he enjoys sex with what's her name, and who wouldn't, right? Especially under the influence of all the drugs that they fucking gave him. You know what I'm saying? But I think there's a case for that.
Even his reaction, I don't think any of us would react that way if somebody, even if a stranger put his hand on my thigh, I might move it away, but I'm not going to freak.
It depends on how he eats the salad, Verno. It depends on how he eats it.
Really, really good point.
What the fuck was that, dude? Jesus.
Fun fact, that guy, he played not the Jim Carrey character, but the other dude whose name I'm losing in Dumb and Dumberer. He played that dude. The main character from Hostel, the one that dies first, played the Harry character in Dumb and Dumberer.
Oh, interesting.
Yeah.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, isn't that funny?
Doesn't this movie also have a lot of I think Adam Green took a lot from this movie in the first Hatchet.
Oh, for sure.
If you think about how Hatchet is formulated and structured, especially with bro-y frat boy, sex trip kind of thing that leads to disaster.
Right. As far as you talking about them pulling off the Psycho thing, that is one bit that I heard that Quentin Tarantino, I think in a conversation that they had together that did a podcast, that was Tarantino's idea, telling him, you got to do Psycho. You got to do the Psycho. No one's done it as well since. I think that was one thing when I watched this a handful of years ago and I didn't enjoy it as much as I did this time. I don't think that worked for me as well. And I think it was, I don't know, watching it this time, I really respected how finely, how well written it was for the guy that becomes the main character. It's a pretty subtle performance that he does leading up to that, where he's kind of the douchebag. He's kind of the guy that you're not supposed to like, that's leading the guy that we are supposed to like to do things that he doesn't want to do, but he's not. He's still likable while he's being that character. And the other guys, neither of them are really, really likable. That might be my biggest ding on the movie, or one of my very few dings, is neither of them are super memorable or great. They're both good. They're both serviceable, if not more than serviceable. But obviously they could have been better in both. Well,
the most memorable and likable character is Oli.
Yeah, totally.
Yeah.
Totally.
I wish he was in there a little bit more. To be
Yeah,
honest.
same. Yeah.
Can you give us a swing?
Yeah, of course, my horse. he
That was
had to
good,
go,
Lynk.
unfortunately. All right, well, let us go ahead. And if you guys have anywhere you want to take this before we move on, but let's just send this thing around. Let's rate it. Stu, I'm going to start with you, and we'll swing it back around. Robbie can finish this off. I was about to get so gross with where I went with that.
What are we doing? What are we doing? Are we doing 5 out of 5 or
Yeah,
okay, yeah, definitely 5 out of 5 for me, man. I just love this. This was fantastic to revisit. Just a joy, it was memorable once again, and I love how it just slowly transforms from one thing to the next. You don't know what to expect. It keeps you guessing, and like ultimately what it leads into with number 2. So I love the world building and how that's cool. That was cool getting that backstory from Robbie about like how the story came to be,
right?
Because you can definitely see it's 2 parts, like, you know what I mean, and like how he married those is brilliant. So
he also was originally planning on doing it in like a mockumentary style for a little bit, and then they started researching into it, like, oh, we're gonna try and make this as legit as possible and really get into like vacation gone wrong stories. And the more they looked into it, like, this fucking almost barely happens. So like, let's just ditch that idea and we'll make it up as we go. But that would have been interesting. Obviously, I'm glad they didn't do that because I don't need another found footage type movie like this. But Steph, your rating and final thoughts, my brother.
I'm gonna give this one a solid 4 out of 5. I wish there's a lot to respect about it, but I think like any qualms people had with the first one are kind of like rectified in the second. So just that being said, I got it. Very solid movie, but I find the second one. Robbie's right this time. I know he's been saying this, but this at first I didn't really believe him before this rewatch, but the second is superior. So with that being said, just because of that, it's already a strong movie, but any problems I think people had with the first one are, ironed out in the second one clearly. So solid 4 out of 5.
Hell yeah, brother. Inja's got an interesting point. Was the entire town in on it? I think the entire hostel was definitely in on it.
I feel like that's the question we get answered in too.
Yeah. And it's not the entire town, but most of the town.
Yeah, it definitely feels like they got most of them in there.
Because they don't like Americans, y'all. Right?
Suck.
They don't give a shit about us.
They fetch the highest price.
We're very entitled fucking people. Anybody that ever worked in retail, think of the most entitled person you fucking had to deal with. That's how Americans are when they go overseas on trips, man.
But in our defense, and I'm saying this right as I'm about to try.
Hey, I'm proud to be an American, brother.
Yeah. Well, okay. If you
God bless the USA,
I'm 40 years old, so like the whole time, people have a hard time like realizing what the goddamn rest of the world was like. It wasn't as fucking developed. When I was a kid, China was fields and people wearing funny hats. Like the world has come a long way since, and plus we just didn't know. Like we were raised just being like, yeah, you were the best by far. We're like, oh, okay. And like, like, I don't know. And maybe we fucking kind of were a little bit in a lot of ways, but that is why we walked around like that forever. 9/11 is the thing that really woke us up and was like, all right, you guys are being really fucking cocky. And you know what I mean? You can't be number one forever. And it really was like the way I personally felt about America and just us and myself and everybody was way different and more cocky before that. Yes. So I kind of get where that attitude comes from. And any 60-year-old man, forgive them. You know what I mean? They can't help themselves.
They can't even get their dick hard anymore, guys. So let's just calm down.
But Robbie, my brother, final thoughts and your rating, brother.
I really love Stu's enthusiastic 5. I couldn't quite give it a 5, but let me break some stuff down here. I love the themes of this movie, right? Like you were just talking about, like, don't get too big for your britches, right? Just because we are in America, we have a very soft life, okay? And Eastern European countries, those people didn't grow up with a soft fucking life, right? And I know there's a younger generation out now that may not remember this, but there was a lot of turmoil in Eastern Europe in the 80s and 90s when we were growing up, right? Like there are people that work for me at my comic shop didn't even know East Germany and West Germany were a fucking thing, right? So there is a hardness to life in other places of the world. And in America, we have a very soft, cushy fucking life, right? So I love that idea of once you leave your safe space, Americans, like, do not think that everything's going to go your fucking way. You see elements of it there's elements of American Werewolf in London in this film, right? Like there's elements, right? But so I love that theme. I love the theme of like the exploitation, like the main character or the guy who we think is supposed to be the main character, right? Is it Josh? Is this? I cannot. I'm tripping. Why do I remember Paxton, but I don't remember the other guy's name?
Right.
Well, I thought it was funny when I watched Hostel 2, when he's like, "My name's Paxton." I'm like, I never fucking heard that in the first one. Yes, it's Josh. Josh.
Okay, cool. So I did know it. Never doubt yourself, Robbie. Unless you're in a foreign country. That's one thing this movie did. I don't want to go to Eastern Europe at all. I don't give a shit. I'm not going. I'll never visit Russia. I will never fucking, you know what I'm saying? Like, I would, no fucking way. I'm sorry. If I ever get into Eastern Europe, it's to go see Castle Dracula in Romania and then get the fuck out as quickly as possible.
Which is why, like, this movie did not really help relations with Eastern Europe.
Definitely
not thrilled with Eli.
Definitely not building bridges with the Soviet bloc on this one.
Yeah, and I like the literally Josh says when he's being approached to go to the brothel and he's like, paying money to go into a room and do whatever I want with a person. It's not my idea of a good time. That is exactly what happens to him, So I love that kind of Eli. This was a smart film. Eli's a smart dude. He's not just sexy. He's not just a great filmmaker. He's fucking smart. Okay. And I don't think I think he is like a true, not just expert on horror, but he is a true, trumpeter of horror. What's the fucking word I'm forgetting right now? Like
ambassador.
An ambassador. Yes, he's an ambassador for horror, right? He's out there like he got me into a lot of cool stuff.
Me
right?
too.
Just
His
hearing
podcast for anyone that hasn't checked out the History of Horror, which is also a TV show, well worth your time.
And I love how the movie takes you by surprise structurally. It lures you in. And when I first watched this movie, I'm like, what, 22, 23, 24, something like that. And
yeah,
I'm like, I know I'm in for a horror movie, but man, I love horror movies that push boundaries, that raise up taboos, that like are like, they like to be crude, they like to be exploitative, they like to be transgressive. This is a very transgressive movie. Think about this, man. We're not far removed. You mentioned scary movies. We're not scary movies happening at the same time, like that franchise, right? We're not far removed from Urban Legend and Valentine, these fucking cookie cutter, safe ass Scream wannabes, right? Like I fucking hate that era of 90s horror.
Like there's a Thanksgiving part of 2023. Yeah, I know, man.
But he did it a little bit more gnarly than they did. No, he did that. No, you're right. He did exactly that, but he did it differently. Go back and watch our video. I mentioned it, I think. But I would say, God, I love the structure. I love the visuals. The first act of this movie is so colorful. And as act 2 and 3 progress, all the color gets drained out of it, man. And the gore effects are great. I can't give it a perfect score because I do think the fucking eye cut is the dumbest thing. Right. But at the same time, it's like, let's take a moment. It's been intense. Let's just have a moment of fucking laughter.
Yeah. You know what? I was thinking about that because we talked about that eye scene, you and I, a few nights ago for a second. He is like, for comic book fans, I feel like he's like the Donny Cates of the horror world, where he's the type that's going to sit around with his buddies.
Dude, that's a great call.
Like, bro, dude. He's going to off the Empire State Building, bro. It's going to be crazy. Like, he's that kind of guy. But that's the moment where it's like, this is stupid. This doesn't make any sense. But people talk about it to this day.
Yeah.
People
there is
but it's still like I still like her seeing a reflection and being like, damn, they really fucked me up. You know what I mean? Like you felt for her in that moment, like like when she finally saw like herself and what they did to her.
You need that moment because Eli Roth was absorbing a lot of Japanese horror at the time, and that is totally something that would be in a Japanese horror movie. Right. Yeah. Plus, the weird yellow fucking semi-fluid that comes out of there, man. Like it's got chunks in it, man. I'm telling
That's also a good moment for the guy who ends up becoming the main character, Paxton, because he's telling that story earlier where this kid was drowning and he didn't go save him. now he has that moment to go back and save her, which I did not get the first time, or before previous watches. I never understood why the fuck is he telling this story about this kid drowning.
He's the main character. He's got the arc. You know, we think it's going to be this dude's arc to actually go out there, get laid, and get over his ex. Very Hatchet, right?
He was in something funny that made me want to bring it up.
Oh, Jay Hernandez?
Yeah, he was like, oh my God, he's this guy?
Oh, he's in Suicide Squad.
Yeah, who is he? He's the
El Diablo or whatever,
fire guy
right?
in Suicide Squad.
Fire guy.
Oh yeah.
That's wild.
Yeah.
That's wild.
I love this movie so much, so I'll keep talking about it. But I just got to say, like, I do love this movie. I think it's great. 4.69.
Booyah. Booyah. I love the score. So 4.69 from Robbie, a 5 from Stu, a 4 from Missing Link. And I really, really fucking enjoyed this movie. I loved the ending too. Everything at the end was really just like bam, bam. They tied up all these loose ends really quickly and really satisfyingly. He's the type, like something I've said this before. I like having this reaction from a horror movie. Oh, you know what I mean? That like cringe and laugh at the same time. And
still
he's
gets
that,
me, man.
Yeah, he's that kind of guy. And the second one, when he fucking shoots that kid, I don't know if that makes me do that. That makes me do a different noise. But he is the type of guy that makes me laugh and be shocked at the same time. It's really fun. I'm gonna give it a 4.5, just because it's not like The Exorcist. It's not Rosemary's Baby. It's not quite on that level for me. It's not one of those tops of all time, but it is probably in my top 10 of the movies or horror movies in the past 20 years now. Since the 2000s, it's up there. And it really, really, honestly, after revisiting these two movies, like my appreciation for Eli Roth as a filmmaker has bumped up a shitload.